Um, so we are on volumes 15 to 20, and I purposely stopped at 20 and have taken a about 2 month long break. Because finishing a volume of Lenin's works, each volume, they all vary in size, but each one is over 500 pages. One per month for 20 months is a long ass time.
And
Um,
how long are these? They're not that long, but they're dense, right?
No, they're long. They're about 50 pages each. Each one is 50 pages or more. Minimum 500 pages. Sorry. They're pretty long. That right behind me. This is volume 30, so I'm not even here yet. But volume 30, the end notes begin on page 531. So
Jesus.
it's a minimum of 500 pages per volume. And so, 20 months of doing that is a lot of living with this guy. And so I needed to take a 2 month break after volume 20. And it was actually strategic because volume 20 brings us right to the eve of World War One. And so there's so much going on, so much riding on the future of Russia, and so much ahead of Lenin that he's actually very foresighted, that he kind of sees. As far as contents of volumes 15 to 20, I'll sort of break it down into, as I do on the episodes, into party,
hmm
politics,
hmm
international goings-ons, and sort of major theoretical questions. The major theoretical question of the 5 volumes that we're covering here is the national question, which is very super relevant to what's going on, but I'll get to that in a minute. We'll start from the bottom up. We'll start from the party. We'll move upwards. In the realm of the party, Lenin is really going to war within the party with the different factions that are emerging within the party, particularly what he refers to as the liquidationists movement. The liquidationists were a group of Russian Marxists who believed that the time had come to, in a sense, eliminate the illegal portion, or illegal activities of the Russian Social Democratic Party. So, everybody who knows any of this stuff, they love to tell a story about Stalin being a bank robber. Well, Stalin didn't actually rob a bank. He did help to coordinate the plan to do so, but physically he didn't rob a bank. But this is what the liquidationists were saying: there's no need for that anymore, right? In order to promote ourselves within the party, in order to become sorry, not the party, within the Duma, in order to become a serious party within the Russian government, to pass legislation, to get reforms done, to get the kind of ball rolling, we have to forsake the illegal aspects of our party and just embrace what they call the legal party. And this is what the liquidationists were arguing. Now, there's some other philosophical aspects to liquidationism, but we don't need to get into that too much. And Lenin's beef with them is to say the illegal activity of that wing of the party is absolutely essential to the success of the legal party. And he wasn't referring to bank robberies or anything like that. Lenin probably would have agreed that, okay, we shouldn't be robbing banks anymore. But the illegal activity that he was referring to is, or was, a type of leafleting, essentially, that, having party agitators go to factories, go door to door, establish underground meetings within the party, and spreading the propaganda underground. That was the type of illegal activity that Lenin said, this is essential for growing our party, and we shouldn't let it go. The liquidators, as they were called, because they wanted to liquidate the illegal part of the party, they didn't agree with him. And so Lenin is spending, these 5 volumes, which comprise the years roughly 1908 to 1913. Lenin is really going after the liquidationists here within the party. And it's so tense the factionalism between the two, between Lenin and the liquidators, is so intense that other factions actually emerge to try to mediate between the two of them. In particular, one is referred to by Lenin as the conciliationists, and these are led by Trotsky. Trotsky jumps into the argument about the liquidationists, and this is the first time that Trotsky really becomes an important character in this entire saga of Lenin's works. But Trotsky jumps in and he tries to play this sort of Schrödinger's fool, Schrödinger's idiot type of person, where he's saying, well, maybe we can find a kind of medium between the two, the liquidationists and the non-liquidationists, the legal
You,
and illegal.
you don't think he's serious about that position?
He is serious about it. Trotsky, he even creates his own newspaper at this time to try to direct the conciliationists his way, to try to work out some kind of medium between them. But Lenin has a real issue with this. First of all, Lenin says this is Trotsky who has no spine. He's unwilling to take a side in this. And he says that you have to take a side because the argument between the liquidators and the non-liquidators, there is no middle ground. You either liquidate the illegal aspects of the party or you maintain them. There's nothing that can happen in between. And so Lenin is saying, effectively, Trotsky's proposals are actually in favor of the liquidators, and so he's not in favor of that. And so you get a lot of the very first personal insults to Trotsky. He refers to him as somebody who's inconsistent, as somebody who is just trying to mold themselves to look better, to kind of what's the word? My brother once referred to it as a social chameleon, right? Somebody who can change their skin to appease different people, to save face. And so that's what's going on at the party level. The party level is fractured, and it's going to further fracture once we get to the national question, because the national question. So now we're moving from the party level and we're moving to all Russian Empire level. The national question emerges in the Russian Duma as the kind of defining feature of the movement before, or of the political problems before World War I. And it really emerged because there is a bill that is proposed in the Duma that concerns the teaching of or the use of the Ukrainian language in Ukrainian primary schools. And the debate emerges between Russian nationalists, socialists, liberals, everybody, about whether or not indigenous languages should be able to be the medium of education for primary schooling. Of course, the nationalists say no. Ukrainian language is not real. They should be taught Russian. Russian is the lingua franca of the empire. Therefore, it's important for even primary school students to learn Russian. The liberals will say the kind of the opposite, right? They promote national self-determination. They think that people should be able to speak Ukrainian where they want to, but they still do maintain that Russian is the lingua franca of the empire, so people do need to learn Russian. The socialists, on the other hand, are split over it because, on the one hand, the socialists recognize that any oppressed nationality deserves autonomy, as they call it. And on the other hand, they do also recognize that Russian is an important medium of communication, of agitation within the empire. And so the question over language, over which language to use, raises a whole bunch of different questions within the Russian Social Democratic Party, but also within the empire itself. That's going to kind of explode once we get to World War I, right? All of this is building up toward World War I, which is the explosion of national identities within the Russian Empire, Austrian Empire, et cetera, et cetera. And it also finds its its expression in the socialist Zionist movement. At the meeting of the Second International, I forget what number meeting. Somebody in your chat who knows these petty details, maybe they know off the top of their head, or maybe they can search it quick. At one of the meetings of the Second International, the Zionist socialists proposed to form their own group within the Second International, which essentially would give them a equal vote to any of the other socialist parties in the world. And there's a huge debate that breaks out because technically Zionists don't have their own country, right? They don't have their own state at this time. But on the other hand, they're not Russian, they're not German, they're not French, they're not whatever, right? They're Jewish, they're Zionists. So the Zionist socialists, they try to cling themselves to the Russian Social Democratic Party because the Russian Empire has the largest population, one of the largest populations of Jews. And so they say, well, we can comprise one of the votes of the Russian Social Democratic Party. And Lenin says, no way, I don't think so. And he's not saying that because he's, anti-Semitic or anything, despite what liberal historians would later argue. But he's saying that because doing so would actually take away a portion of the vote from the Russian Social Democrats that is not Jewish. And so the solution that they come up with is to make the Zionist socialist body representatives a sort of consultative group rather than a full member of the Second International, which is important. So there's going to be a lot of Jewish socialist Zionists who are very unhappy with the fact that they don't have their own autonomous vote and representation in the Second International. But it's the compromise that I guess everybody had to agree with. Internationally, there's also the eve of World War I, and so we're seeing the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in Southeast Europe, particularly in the Balkans. And as the Ottoman Empire recedes back to the Anatolian Peninsula, where present-day Turkey is, France, Britain, the United States even, and Russia are all sort of vying for the natural resources and influence in the Balkans. The Russian Tsar claims that he has some authority over these people because they're ethnically Slavic. The French and the British and the Americans are primarily interested in the Balkan region for its natural resources, for its raw materials that it has, and for the leftover industries that the Ottomans are sort of seeding as they are moving back, collapsing. And the Ottomans are mostly collapsing because of their own financial failures within the empire and the emergence of what's called the Young Turk movement, which Lenin sees as a very promising movement towards representative government in Turkey. He also acknowledges the Chinese Revolution in 1911. This is the formation of the Chinese Republic, not the People's Republic, but the Chinese Republic, the Nationalist Republic. And Lenin is kind of pointing to them and saying, like, look, we're paying a lot of attention to what's happening in Europe, and it's not really going in our favor. Things are getting more tense. Britain and Germany are in the midst of an arms race, but look what's happening over here. These people in Asia who have been oppressed by Europeans for over half a century are emerging, and they're powerful, and there's a lot of them. So Lenin has that kind of foresight to recognize that something is awakening in China before it actually does. There are some other things that some viewers or listeners might find interesting that I found interesting. Leo Tolstoy dies within the time span of these 5 volumes, and so Lenin writes a sort of obituary for Tolstoy, in which he says, essentially, he says, Tolstoy captured the anger and the recognition that there was something wrong with with the empire, with the way that the empire works. You know, Tolstoy was famously like an anarchist, a vegetarian, whatever. You know, he had radical politics despite being from the aristocracy, from a very aristocratic family. And Lenin says, you know, he captured the anger, he captured a lot of the hatred that people felt for the regime, but he didn't do anything with it. He couldn't do anything with it. He was from a very bourgeois, aristocratic background. All he could do was really write stories, but he couldn't agitate, and he had no central message about what to do. It's for Lenin the difference between what we talk about, Jason, with punk and hardcore, between just being a nihilist and you know, complaining about everything, and then actually having a platform to try to change things, right? There's a difference between just complaining and hating everything and then actually being an agent for change. And so Lenin says, you know, I give the old man his due for exposing the regime for what it is, but he didn't do enough in terms of, you know, offering an actual change to the world. So that's where we are. That brings us right to the eve of World War One. As I said, the nationalist question is the biggest debate that's going on in the Russian Duma, in the Russian government. The Socialist International, that debate over the national question is trickling into the Russian Social Democratic Party, and by extension, the Second International. It will ultimately be the reason why the Second International falls apart during the war, because of the nationalist question. So it's really important to just recognize that this is where it's coming from. It's coming from the Russian government.